All right, so we're diving deep today, folks, into a market that's seeing some pretty remarkable things. We're talking about joint pain injections, and we've got some excerpts here from a 2025 market report, and we're going to pull out the big takeaways for you, the things that maybe you haven't heard before, or maybe you have, but we're going to really try to get to the heart of where this market is and where it's headed.
Yeah, I think what really jumps out at you when you first start looking at this is just the scale and the growth that's projected.
Hmm.
We're looking at, in 2025, a global market for joint pain injections that sits at around 600 and 248 million US dollars. And then just to give you an idea of where things are going, that number is projected to jump to 14,295.30 million US dollars by 2033.
Okay, so we're talking about more than doubling in just 8 years. I mean, that's a huge jump. And I see here that the CAGR, the compound annual growth rate between 2025 and 2033, is projected at 10.90%. I think for some folks, that term CAGR may not be as familiar. So could you just quickly break down what that means in this context?
Sure, yeah. The CAGR, or compound annual growth rate, is essentially, it gives you that average yearly growth rate over that time period. And it assumes that profits are reinvested, so it's a really good indicator of kind of the dynamism and the growth potential of a particular sector.
Mhm.
So 10.90% CAGR, that's pretty significant.
Yeah, no, that puts it into perspective. Now, when we think about this kind of growth, there has to be a driving force behind it. So what's really pushing this surge in the joint pain injection market?
Well, one of the main things the report points to is the rising prevalence of conditions like osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis. So as more and more people are dealing with these joint issues, the demand for effective treatments to manage the pain, it just goes up.
Hmm.
And injections, they're increasingly becoming seen as a really valuable option.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. More people dealing with joint pain, there's going to be more demand for solutions. So we've got this big global picture, but let's zoom in a bit geographically. Where are we seeing the most activity in this market right now?
So as of 2025, North America is really the big player. They hold the largest share, accounting for over 40% of the global market. And that translates to like a market size of 2,311.76 million US dollars. And even though it's already the biggest chunk, it's projected to keep growing at a decent clip with a CAGR of 9.3% through 2033.
It's not really a surprise, is it, that North America's leading the way? I mean, they've got, very developed healthcare systems there. And I'm guessing within North America, the United States probably dominates, right?
Oh, absolutely. In 2025, the U.S. market size alone is estimated at 1,823.98 million US dollars, and they're looking at a KGR of about 9.1%. But, Canada and Mexico are also pulling their weight in the region. Canada's market size is estimated to be around 277.41 million US dollars with a CGR of 10.1%, and Mexico is at 210.37 million with a 9.8% CAGR. So pretty solid performance across the board in North America.
Okay, so North America's in the lead for now, but what about Europe? How do they stack up?
Europe's holding strong in second place with over 30% of the global market share. And their market size in 2025 is estimated at 1,811.92 million US dollars. And they're also on a pretty solid growth trajectory with a TGR of 9.9% from 2025 to 2033. So, it's a substantial market, and it looks like it's going to keep growing.
Are there any standout countries within Europe, either in terms of size or growth?
Definitely. You've got the UK. In 2025, their market is sitting around 304.40 million US dollars with a really healthy CGR of 10.7%. Germany's another big one, 358.76 million US dollars in 2025 and a 10.1% CEGR. And then you've got France, Italy, Russia, all with pretty sizable markets, each ranging from around 150 million to 280 million US dollars. And their key GRs are kind of in that 8.9% to 9.3% range. So it's a mix of like well-established markets and some that are still seeing a lot of growth.
Interesting. So a variety of players there in Europe. Now, I do recall that the report highlighted one region in particular for having a really rapid growth rate.
Yeah, that's right. The Asia-Pacific region, or APAC. Now, while their market share in 2025 is around 23%, so a bit smaller than North America and Europe, their projected capped ADR from 2025 to 2033 is a whopping 13.7%. That's the fastest growth rate we see across all the regions.
Wow, 13.7%. So what's driving that kind of, accelerated growth in APAC?
Well, it's a combination of factors. So in a lot of these APAC countries, you've got aging populations, which unfortunately often means a higher likelihood of joint disorders. And at the same time, you're seeing like increased awareness and acceptance of these non-surgical treatment options like injections. And then, of course, you've got improved access to healthcare in general and in many of these economies, rising disposable income. So all of those things together are really fueling this growth.
It's fascinating how all those factors come together to create this, kind of perfect storm for growth. Are there any standout countries within APAC that are worth mentioning?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So China's a major player, obviously, with a 2025 market size of 629.8 billion US dollars and a CAGR of 13.2%. But India is really interesting. They've got the highest national CAGR at 15.6%, and that's with a 2025 market size of 149.95 million. And then you've got Japan and South Korea also with significant markets and strong double-digit CAGR. So it's a really dynamic region, a lot happening there.
So we've got North America and Europe as those, powerhouses in terms of size right now, but APAC is definitely the one to watch for future growth. Now, what about some of the other regions, like South America, the Middle East, Africa? How do they fit into this whole global picture?
Well, they're smaller pieces of the overall pie for sure, but they're definitely still important, and they're all showing pretty decent growth. So South America, they hold over 5% share, and their market size in 2025 is estimated at 237.42 million US dollars, and their projected CAGR is 11.6%. And within South America, Brazil and Argentina are the biggest markets. Then you've got the Middle East, about 2% share in a market of 249.92 million US dollars in 2025. And they have a really strong projected CAGR of 12.2%. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are the key players there. And then lastly, Africa, they're sitting at around 1% share with a market size of 137.46 million in 2025, and they're expected to grow at a pretty respectable 11.2% CAGR, with South Africa kind of leading the way.
It's fascinating, isn't it, to see how all these different regions are, on their own trajectories. Now, the report also digs into the types of joints that are being treated. So what can you tell us about that breakdown?
Yeah, so according to the report, the knee and ankle segment, that's likely to be the dominant one in the joint pain injection market. And, that makes sense when you think about how common osteoarthritis is, especially in the knees, and then, ankle injuries. Those are just super common, especially if you're active or, an athlete. It's just those joints take a lot of wear and tear, so it's not surprising that they'd be a big focus for pain management.
Yeah, you always hear about knee problems, especially as people get older, but is there any other joint type that's like, showing some interesting trends or growth?
Actually, yeah. The facet joints of the spine, those are identified as the fastest growing segment. And just to clarify, facet joints, they're those small joints that connect the vertebrae in your spine. So what we're seeing is that the rising prevalence of spinal disorders, things like degenerative disc disease or facet joint osteoarthritis, that's really driving this growth because injections that target these facet joints, they're increasingly becoming a popular option for managing back and neck pain, without having to resort to surgery.
So while the knee and ankle treatments, they're kind of like the workhorse right now, the volume's there, it's the spinal facet joint injections that are really seeing that rapid increase in demand. Interesting distinction. Now, let's move on to the injections themselves. What types of injections are really leading the market right now?
Right now, the biggest market share belongs to corticosteroid injections. And that makes sense, right? If they've been around for a while, they're pretty effective at reducing inflammation. They offer relatively quick pain relief, especially for conditions like osteoarthritis. So because they've got that established track record, and because they're often used as a first-line treatment, they're holding that dominant position for now.
Okay, corticosteroids, that's a familiar one. But I know the report also mentioned another type of injection that's on the rise.
Yes, exactly. Hyaluronic acid injections, those are seeing really rapid growth right now. And basically, hyaluronic acid, it's a substance that's naturally found in your joint fluid. And these injections, they basically replenish that hyaluronic acid, which helps to lubricate the joint, reduce inflammation, and improve mobility. And what's interesting is that they're seen as offering potentially longer-lasting pain relief, and they have a pretty minimal side effect profile. So they're becoming a really attractive option, especially for older folks, as an alternative to some of those more traditional pain management approaches.
I love that. It's like giving your joints that extra lubrication they need, like oiling a squeaky hinge. It's a great analogy. So we've got corticosteroids as the current front runner, but hyaluronic acid is definitely making its presence known. Now, how are all these injections actually getting to the people who need them? What are the main distribution channels?
So the report points to hospital pharmacies as having the largest market share right now. And that's pretty logical, right? Hospitals are where a lot of those, more specialized treatments happen, including those more advanced injection therapies like hyaluronic acid and even, things like PRP and stem cell injections, which are considered regenerative medicine. And of course, hospitals, they just have that, that expertise and the patient trust that goes along with that. So it's a natural fit.
Yeah, that feels like the traditional path. Go to the hospital, get your treatment. But I imagine there have been some, changes in how people access these injections.
Oh, for sure. Online pharmacies, they're identified as a really rapidly growing sector for this.
Mhm.
And it reflects, that broader trend that we're seeing everywhere of people wanting more convenience, wanting to be able to manage their healthcare from home. And with e-commerce and telemedicine, it's so much easier now for people to order these products online. Things like corticosteroids and hyaluronic acid.
Hmm.
And often the prices are competitive, sometimes even better, and you don't have to deal with, going to appointments and waiting rooms. So it's definitely shaking things up.
It's a really interesting shift, and I think it speaks to how healthcare is evolving in general. Now, earlier we touched on some of the factors that are driving this market's growth, but let's dig a little deeper. What are some of those key drivers that the report specifically calls out?
Well, as we already mentioned, the aging population, that's a huge factor. More people getting older means more people dealing with joint issues. But beyond that, there's also a lot of excitement and advancement in the field of regenerative medicine. Therapies like PRP, platelet-rich plasma, and stem cell injections, those are gaining a lot of traction. It's really fascinating. It's like harnessing the body's own healing power to repair those joints. And then lastly, there's just this growing preference for minimally invasive procedures. People just don't want to go under the knife unless they absolutely have to. So injections are a really attractive alternative.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Less invasive, more focused on the body's natural healing. I mean, those are powerful forces. But, every market has its challenges. Are there any restraints on this growth that the report mentions?
Yeah, a couple of things to keep in mind. So the cost, that's always a factor. Some of those more advanced injections, especially things like hyaluronic acid and those biologics, those can be expensive,
Hmm.
and that can make it difficult for some people to access them. And then there's the regulatory landscape, which is, always complex. The approvals for these treatments can be strict and take time. And then there's always the potential for side effects, things like infections or allergic reactions. So those are all factors that can kind of, put a little bit of a damper on the growth.
It makes sense. Cost and regulations, those are always going to be considerations, especially in healthcare. So, looking ahead, what are some of the key trends that you think are going to shape the future of this market?
Well, one of the things that's really exciting is the increasing adoption of those biologic injections, those PRP and stem cell therapies. I think there's a lot of potential there to really, make a difference for patients, to offer more effective, longer lasting relief. And then on the more, kind of technical side, there are a lot of advancements happening in developing these sustained release and long acting corticosteroid injections. So the idea is that, you get the injection and it lasts longer. You don't need to come back as often. So those are two areas where I think we're going to see a lot of interesting developments.
So, it sounds like a lot of focus on both, increasing the effectiveness of the treatments and making them more convenient for the patients. That makes sense. Now, lastly, I know the report gives a little bit of insight into the competitive landscape. So, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it sounds like it's a pretty competitive market. The major companies in this space are really focused on innovation, developing those new regenerative injections, those minimally invasive treatments, things like that. And they're using a lot of different strategies to stay ahead, things like strategic partnerships, acquisitions, and they're putting a lot of resources into clinical trials.
Are there any specific examples of that competitive activity that the report calls out?
Yeah, there are a couple of interesting ones. So Anika Therapeutics, Inc., they announced some really positive phase 3 clinical trial results for their product Single back in November of 2022, and they're actually moving towards seeking FDA approval. So that just shows you how, companies are actively working to bring these new, potentially more effective treatments to market. And then other examples, Sanofi, which is a pretty big player in the pharmaceutical space, they partnered with IGM Biosciences, Inc. back in March of 2022. And their focus is on developing new therapeutics for immunology and inflammation. So you've got these big companies that are really, investing in this space.
It's great to have those examples. It kind of makes it all more real, So we've covered a lot of ground here: the overall market size, the projected growth, the regional differences, the types of joints, the types of injections, the distribution channels, the drivers, the challenges, the trends, even a little peek at the competition. It's a lot to take in. So, what would you say are the absolutely must know takeaways for anyone who wants to get a handle on this market?
Okay, so if I had to boil it down, I'd say the big takeaways are, first of all, this market is big, and it's going to get a lot bigger. That growth is significant. Second, the regions, they're all a little different. North America is the leader now, but Asia Pacific is the one to watch. Their growth is just phenomenal. And then understanding those breakdowns, by joint type, knee and ankle are the big ones, but those spinal facet joint injections, Those are the ones to watch. And by injection type corticosteroids are the current king, but hyaluronic acid is coming up fast. And finally, understanding those distribution channels, the hospitals are still important, but those online pharmacies, they're changing the game. And the big thing that's driving all of this is, we've got an aging population and people just want less invasive ways to manage their pain.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Demographics and patient preferences, those are huge factors. And then you've got all this innovation happening, new technologies, new treatments. It's constantly evolving. This has been a really, really interesting deep dive into the joint pain injection market. And for those of you listening, think about this. We've got these advancements in regenerative medicine. We've got this shift towards, online healthcare access. How are those things going to continue to change this market in the years to come? It's definitely a space to keep an eye on. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.